The waterways of Fingal are the focus of this, the third of a series of environmental videos produced by Lusk Tidy Town Committee for the national schools of the area. We are very fortunate to have such a person as Trevor Sargent TD, who is also a local environmentalist, to explain the interesting background to the waterways of Fingal.
Well, here we are with Knock Lake behind me here, or Wavan Lake as it's also called, near Balrotherry in the north of Fingal. And Knock Lake is famous, first of all, because of its association with industry in Balbriggan. It used to drive the water wheels. The water from here would go down to Balbriggan, and that would drive the water wheels. But now, because of course the mills are not operating, certainly not on water wheels anymore, we have a beautiful wildlife reserve, and it's a freshwater lake, and there are not too many freshwater lakes like this in this part of Ireland, but this one is part of the heritage of Fingal, which is hidden, unlike the coast, which is the marine environment, the saltwater environment, which we know about from the beaches and the coast of Fingal. But this is a freshwater lake, and like freshwater rivers and ponds, is very rich in wildlife because the freshwater has different types of conditions, the fast-flowing rivers and streams, then the slower river, and then the lake, which is quite still, and then you have swamps and marshy parts that have less oxygen still. So there's a huge variety. And with 20,000 fish species worldwide, 5,000, a quarter of them, are in fresh water, which when you think that the world has 70% of its surface covered by the sea, is an amazing amount of life to be concentrated in environments like this, and the freshwater environment of Fingal particularly. Well, here we are, and this part of the river, of the Bracken River, going into Balbriggan, has come from the lake where we were, Knock Lake or Wavan Lake. And this is now quite fast flowing because it is coming down, and it's a young river, you could say, at this point. And because of that, it has a good bit of oxygen in the water because it's flowing over the rocks, and that creates a good turbulent oxygen creating conditions for the kind of little animals. And we're going to go down and check out what's in the water, the little animals, little caddisfly, maybe diving beetle, maybe the boatman, as it's called, who goes over the first surface of the water, although he mightn't be here because the water's moving a bit too fast for him. But that type of animal life is called biological testing of the water as well. If we can find the animals that like clean water, well then we know we have clean water. Whereas if we're finding animals like the rat-tailed maggot, for example, then we know that we have kind of polluted water, because the rat-tailed maggot uses a kind of a snorkel to get over the water and go get the oxygen from the actual air in the environment around us here above the water. So that's the kind of indicators that are important, not just because we're interested in wildlife, but we want to know the quality of the water as well. And there's another type of testing that the council does, which is chemical testing, and that means they take a bit of water, they check what chemicals are in it, and that can indicate whether there has been a spill of some chemical or whether it's clean. But it doesn't really indicate the long-term health of the river, because to do that you need to look at the animals in the river. So that's why we have the sieve here and the little clear glass bowl here, because then we can see fairly clearly with our own naked eye the type of animals that live in this river. Well, you can see when we do a little bit of a trawl with even a kitchen sieve, we can get an idea about the kind of life that's in the water, even in a fast-flowing stream like this. And when we see little caddisflies and the type of little animal that is well able to breathe in this water, we know there's enough oxygen in it, and therefore it's a reasonably healthy river. But of course it's even more healthy if we get a diversity of little animals and insects, and we haven't got a great diversity here, so I'd say it's moderately clean. but not as clean as it might be if it was high up in the mountains and away from housing and the kind of development that we have in the area. So that really indicates it's moderately clean, but could be better. And I suppose that's better than very polluted anyway. Well, here we are on the banks of the Bracken River again, but this time we are in Balbriggan, and the way that the council have built walls on each side is not good for wildlife, but I suppose it does at least keep people safe behind the railings from falling into the river. However, it's going into the harbour here, and as you can see there are rocks just below here which create the environment that sometimes is favourable for my favourite Irish bird, which is the dipper. And it's a distinctly Irish bird, the Irish dipper. It's bigger than the other dippers in the rest of Europe, and it is like a wren, except that it is bigger and it has that habit of dipping its head, which gives it the name in English. In Irish, of course, it's called An Gawa Dove, meaning the blacksmith. And perhaps there are stories going back in time as to why that bird was called the blacksmith. Maybe it's because it was important in the river on its own and was a feature of the river, just like the blacksmith was in every Irish town and village, including here in Balbriggan, where the blacksmith's shop is still there. In fact, there are a number of blacksmiths' premises still there, but they're not practicing blacksmiths anymore, of course. And that is part of the history of the river, the birds that live along it, as well as the fish, as well as the insect life, and the wider environment which is affected by the river, and which has indeed created this landscape and this lovely parkland in Balbriggan, and then the harbour where the river empties into. Well, it's hard to believe this beautiful bridge behind me here, going over the Broadmeadow River, is out of sight for most people as they fly up and down the N1 between Swords and Balbriggan. And this bridge has been here for many, many years before many of us were born. But also on this river is a lovely home for the heron. And the heron is very much a river bird, but also a marsh bird. And it can be found from time to time here, waiting patiently as fish pass by, waiting for its supper. But it's also a lovely area as well for the wagtail, particularly the grey wagtail, which is quite common along the Broadmeadow River and along the Ward River nearby here. And the wagtail, the grey wagtail, is actually very yellow looking, but we have to look at a yellow wagtail, which is very rare, to see just why it's called a grey wagtail and not a yellow wagtail. But if we wait long enough, we will see those birds and many others along this river. Right, well, here we are with the mature Broadmeadow and Ward River coming together, ready to go into the Broadmeadow estuary. And along the banks you can see perfect habitat which would suit an otter, and we have found otters here. And the otter in Ireland is a darker kind of otter than in any other part of the world, and is distinctly an Irish otter. And that's probably the reason in Irish why it's called An Dover Chu, which is the dark hound. And it's also called An Madra Ishka, the water dog. So you can see that its habits of bounding along remind people of a dog, but it is really a beautiful wild animal, and it would be very much at home on this river. Of course, we wouldn't see it during the day too much. It's a very shy animal, But we might actually see the kingfisher, because the kingfisher, a bit like the otter, burrows into the bank of the river, lays about 6 to 8 eggs, and of course is very territorial. So when those chicks have fledged after about a month and can fly and hunt for themselves, they're expelled to another territory. So we only generally see a kingfisher on its own, but when we see it, we remember it because it's a beautiful flash of light, and the kingfisher would be very much at home along these banks. Wow, beautiful Broadmeadow estuary here, and as we can see, the river coming in is actually two rivers. It's the Broadmeadow River and the Ward River coming together, coming in at the estuary. And because we have found in the Ward River little salmon fry in the last 2 years, it seems that salmon have come up here and gone to the source of the Ward River. And we're talking about going into County Meath for the Broadmeadow and the Ward here now, and have laid eggs. And one female salmon can lay between 12 and 15,000 eggs in one go. But of course only a few actually survive and make it back down the river out to the sea, where they mature in the hope that they can come back to the same river where they were born. So there's a whole story of the salmon on Bradon Fassa from Irish mythology that is working its way here. Maybe we don't see it, but from time to time when we see those small salmon coming down, it's obvious that the adult salmon have made their way up this river, which is great to see. Well, we've taken a trip around Fingal and it's really beautiful. The rivers and indeed the lake and the streams, which we can find very often quite close to where we live and work and go to school, but we don't notice it maybe every day. And because it's so beautiful, it really does have to be said that there are some people who really don't appreciate that type of beauty, and the kind of illegal dumping that we've seen really has to be stopped. And because it's unacceptable, we have to really try and find out who's doing it and try and get them to stop doing it, because these rivers are precious for ourselves, for the plant life, for the fish and the birds and the animals like the otter that live along its banks. And that is why these rivers are so important. But it's also important that we recognise that the plants that are being bought, for example, in garden centres, are making their way into the rivers, and they are causing problems for other plants. And so we have to be careful about what we put into the river, even if we don't mean any harm. Sometimes plants can be causing problems if they're not native to the area. And we've seen that with the giant hogweed and other type of water weeds that have taken over parts of the rivers and lakes in our area. So that's really why we want to say, please look out for the rivers, look after them, look after the streams nearby, and look after the wildlife that lives there.